Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's always the job of the first speaker after lunch to get the energy in the room a bit up. I thought so that this may not be necessary since everybody is so energized by the cause that brings you together. So, good afternoon. I'm honored to be invited to address the 14th Symposium on the ICAO Traveler Identification Program on behalf of the World Economic Forum. We deeply value, as World Economic Forum, our partnership with the International Civil Aviation Organization and the opportunity to contribute to the efforts of the TRIP strategy. The World Economic Forum is globally recognized as the international organization for public-private cooperation. Having been in operation for 5 decades, the Forum has been most known for its annual meeting, which takes place in Davos every year. The Forum's annual meeting brings together world leaders from across the globe, including the most influential CEOs in a large community of heads of states. This year, in January, 60 of them, for the purpose of catalyzing action to improve the state of the world. As such, the Forum upholds 4 core values, that of being global, completely independent, impartial, and future-oriented. In doing so, it strives to build consensus and momentum towards addressing those issues which are globally challenging. Over the past few years, the Forum has entered a new phase, shifting from facilitating dialogue to driving impact through a platform approach. In particular, it uses its ability to bring together public and private sector leaders to focus on anticipating and understanding the major changes driven by the 4th Industrial Revolution. The Forum explores the question of how society adapts to emerging technologies that are changing at a pace never seen before in human history. For example, the emergence and proliferation of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, to name a topic close to your to the heart of ICAO, and I had a very exciting conversation about this earlier today in this building. For governments, this leads to many questions. For example, how does policymaking adapt to this new pace of change and become an enabling element of technological adoption rather than a lagging indicator? How does policymaking ensure emerging technologies are used for positive societal outcomes rather than negative ones? In asking these questions, we know that some of the major challenges of our time cannot be solved by individual actors on their own. They require cooperation among stakeholders and, importantly, across fields of expertise. In particular, we see this pressing need for collaboration as we consider the growing strains of travel security in the face of the unprecedented global movement of people. The aviation, travel, and tourism ecosystem contributes 10% to global GDP and fosters local and global economic development and job creation. However, the potential for this industry to continue to contribute so significantly to global prosperity is at risk. The global middle class will grow by at least 400 million people in the next 5 years, resulting in just as many people gaining access to the ability to travel. International arrivals are predicted to increase by 50% to 1.8 billion by 2030. To accommodate this demand, the World Travel and Tourism Council predicts that by 2027, we will need 90 million more people working in hotels, airlines, and airports. The increasing number of travelers presents an enormous challenge for air borders. Current constraints on infrastructure, human and capital resources are likely to result in bottlenecks and strained operations in aviation and border security, thus increasing risks related to national security and soft targets. Recognizing that facilitating the secure movement of international travelers through airports is a priority for both nation-states and industry partners, the Forum worked with its stakeholder to identify mutually beneficial global interventions that would accelerate our ability to address these challenges. In collaboration with Interpol, we reviewed the impact of existing trusted and registered traveler programs. We learned that, while effective for small portions of travelers, independently they are limited in their ability to differentiate and process passengers on a large enough scale. This was due in some cases to the expensive and human resource intensive nature of implementation, low levels of trust between participating countries, resulting in duplicated vetting procedures and low rates of adoption due to cost or the onerous nature of application processes. Together with our partners, we learned that central to this challenge was to find effective ways for border and aviation security authorities to receive passenger information far in advance of travel, as well as receive enough appropriate information to help them differentiate passengers through individualized risk assessment. Undertaking risk assessment, basically based purely on biographic data, such as nationality, can in many cases be ineffective and be perceived as discriminatory. The forum has therefore worked closely with ICAO, IATA, and ACI to understand the efforts they are each undertaking with member states and industry partners respectively. We learned from the ICAO New Technologies Working Group on the versatility of the e-passport and the potential of digital travel credentials, and from IATA's One ID program on the opportunities that exist for airports and airlines to leverage a single token ID on biometrics on site. With these and others in mind, the forum conceptualized the known digital traveler identity concept. The known digital traveler identity concept, or KTDI, recognizes that there are a multitude of ongoing local pilots and programs that seek to deliver a seamless experience for the traveler in the airport journey. Airports like Schiphol, Heathrow, and Dubai are radically improving the customer experience and optimizing efficiencies through the use of biometrics and airline on airport joint pilots. The KTDI concept seeks to address three gaps in the current landscape. First, involving all government actors to address holistic process improvement. Second, incorporating the full end-to-end traveler journey into the process. And third, providing a mechanism for interoperability between localized traveler facilitation initiatives. First, for true, secure, and seamless air border crossings to be achieved, it must be tackled as a holistic system, and therefore it requires public-private collaboration. Governments must be partners in the process from the outset. Collaboration with governments ensures that systems are designed to optimize the whole ecosystem rather than just some components of the travel journey. To achieve a holistic intervention requires the inputs not just of issuing authorities, but transport ministries, border authorities, and regulators. The KTDI was conceptualized and continues to be refined with the active participation of government partners and specifically seeks to address the challenges related to immigration and border control as central to the larger machine. Second, in much the same way, we are able to make the system far more robust if we are able to move beyond the airport component of the traveler journey. The KTDI concept is designed to enable interoperability throughout the end-to-end journey, enabling hotels, car rental companies, and online travel agencies to benefit from a system-wide intervention. Importantly, in the current processes, the only verified information of a traveler is that which is contained in a secure passport. The information a traveler shares with customs about their destination address or their place of work is not authenticated or verified. The KTDI concept seeks to leverage cryptography, public-private keys, distributed ledgers, and biometrics to plug this gap. Using technologies, passengers can have their additional information verified by their employer or hotel, strengthening the validity of their information and providing trusted data to border and security authorities. Third, to achieve secure and seamless travel, these localized interventions and ID-related activities need to be able to talk to each other in an international and interoperable manner. National and bilateral programs are designed to serve specific needs and context and are unlikely to enable the scale required to address the impending surge of travelers. The KDTI essentially seeks to provide the middle messaging layer, an open source standard enabled layer of technology that enables interoperability between those efforts and puts the traveler at the center so that he or she can share their information at will for greater ease of experience. This upholds privacy by design and avoids the needs for airports, airlines, border agencies, and even partner countries to share information about the passenger with each other or rely on a shared centralized database, which may be a nightmare from a cyber security point of view. Instead, it allows the passenger to share the accumulated identity information and travel history with destination countries. In January 2018, we officially launched the KTDI concept with a prototype demonstration of a 2030 vision at the annual meeting in Davos. Simultaneously, we secured the collaboration of the Canadian and Netherlands governments to work with us and their industry partners to explore how this concept would fit into national policies, mandates, and operations. Today, we have a fully established pilot project team with the two governments, their flag carriers, and Toronto, Montreal, and Schiphol airports. Together, we are designing a cross-border pilot for potential launch in fall 2019, which will see an initial sample of trusted flyers travel from Amsterdam to Montreal and Toronto and back without having to remove their passport and actively contributing and benefiting from improved security and facilitation efforts in the airport journey. Why is it that we are so excited at the World Economic Forum about this pilot and the progress we have made so far as a community? In the very process of designing the pilot, we are testing new models of industry and government collaboration and co-design, seeking to improve operations and outcomes for each stakeholder in the ecosystem. Furthermore, we are seeking to design a globally interoperable system, which, if we truly want to achieve this, requires government engagement. Not just one department in one country, but as observed with Canada and the Netherlands, collaborative efforts from 3 to 4 departments across at least 2 countries demonstrating that we can find methods for addressing diverse needs if we set out to design systems together rather than taking siloed approaches. We believe that the technologies to make our borders more secure and seamless already exist. It is this collaboration that will really enable the progress we so desperately need. Because of this, we continuously seek out opportunities to support and strengthen the efforts and achievements of our partners and welcome input from all government agencies. As we all anticipate what our collective future may look like, we'd welcome dialogue with any states about how we can leverage the forum's platform to advance our shared interest. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you very much, Christoph, for these inspiring words and a reality check on the global state of affairs. Very well appreciated. Thank you. We now move on to session 4, ICAO MRTD standards and specifications, travel documents integrity. Integrity, a word we've heard many times over the past day and a half. To lead us into this seminar, we have, or this session I should say, we have again with us Mr. Michael Hawley, Chairperson of the ICAO New Technologies Working Group. And Mike, we're looking forward to some very interesting discussions here. Over to you. Welcome. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. This session shall hopefully provide an opportunity for enhancing international understanding of machine-readable travel document specifications, technical reports, key observations, and insight on chip encoding defects that lead to operational challenges. These presentations will provide focus on how ICAO and your countries have endeavored to make all travel documents secure. Through the hard work of the ICAO international experts, we should continue to do so. However, we should always be cognizant that MRTD security and facilitation is anchored by proper identity, vetting, and management. Our first presentation is provided by Mr. Juan Enrique Torboda Alvarez and Mr. Valentin Ramirez Prieto. Enrique is the Chief Commissioner of the National Police Force of Spain. His noteworthy career has been with the National Police Force, advancing through the ranks to his current post as head of the Identity Documents Division. Valentin has received a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science degree in electronics. Currently, he is the project manager of the Spanish ID card and the Spanish biometric passport. Their presentation shall be in Spanish and focus on the new Spanish EID. Gentlemen.
Thank you. This presentation is in Spanish. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
En esta presentación
In this presentation, we're going to quickly explain to you the features of the new Spanish EID, which we're just going to start issuing at the beginning of next year. In this picture, you see the current Spanish ID. It's entirely up to date and in line with all the standards and latest technologies, but because this document is so important, we have introduced a project that's been ongoing for about 2 years to create a new electronic ID, which has the full design. The design is essentially the same. It's going to be compliant with all the standards. The hardware and software architecture has been updated.
Okay. Now it is working. Okay. Okay. La nueva versión del DNI.
The new EID has a number of features which you see listed on this slide, and we're going to go through them one by one. First, the EID serves as a travel document, and it can be used for quick access kiosks at automated border controls. And in addition to that, we want to bring in a new data structure for passports. And we have selected a chip with 350 kilobits of flash memory. And hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to implement it fully. Another important feature is that this is in line with the new European regulation, EIDAS. And this is the regulation that governs electronic signatures and documentation. In June of this year, the Spanish police demonstrated to the European Commission that the current EID 3.0 is in compliance with the EIDAS regulation. And the same will be true for the upcoming EID 4.0. Here we have a brief summary of the protection profiles that are used to certify the product. We won't go into the detail here for lack of time, but this is just to give you an idea of all the work being done to certify a product of this kind and make sure it's secure. Now, for the chip, we have chosen a Cortex-M architecture for the chip, and this is very innovative because in the world of cell phones, you often see Cortex-M, but in smart cards, this is relatively new. ACM Electronics was the first to use such architecture in this field, and many are following their example. This architecture is much more powerful and it's faster. Instead of 16 bits, it's 32 bits, and it speeds up operations considerably. In addition to this, Cortex-M architecture is highly standardized, and you can use it for an EID and all sorts of platforms, and it can be easily transferred from one chip manufacturer to another. We've also updated our algorithms. We believe that RSA is at the end of its lifespan. It's becoming obsolete, at least for cards, because you need very large key sizes to ensure security, which RSA just doesn't support anymore. And technology is outpacing it. So we've changed our algorithm to elliptical technology. We use asymmetric cryptography. We use AES 128, which has become standard. And it's an ongoing process. There's constant development. So that concludes my part of the presentation. But I just want to say that a modern document is not much use if you don't have state-of-the-art structure behind it. And Enrique is going to explain to you the 24-hour center, which provides support for citizens who have problems with their travel documents overseas.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Following on from the presentation of the new EID of Spain, I'd just like to tell you about a service that we have been providing for a number of years and which has been very successful. Whatever the system used in Spain, we have come to the conclusion that we need an instrument to provide up-to-the-minute solutions to solve people's problems, and namely Spanish citizens who have lost their ID cards or travel documents abroad. I represent the documents unit of the Spanish police. We've been in operation for 66 years and managing the ID card, and we issue over 9 million documents per year, both the IDs and passports, for a population of 45 million in our country. So whatever system we've been using over time, we have seen a need to solve urgent problems. People need an answer very quickly, and we have to have an official to confirm identity up to the minute, and somebody needs to be there around the clock, 24/7, all year long. Because consulates around the world all have different schedules, and a call might come in from anywhere in the world at any time, day or night. So we have created this 24-hour center, It's a one-stop shop for emergencies or particularly problematic situations. This single window is mainly intended to solve problems of citizens overseas, and it has a 30-minute limit. It usually turns around the problem in 30 minutes. And they also serve citizens in country. And they serve public institutions such as courts and various authorities who need an urgent answer about the identity of an individual who might be under arrest or about to be arrested. And they need an answer very quick. This experience has been very successful over the years. And now we want to share this experience. We get about 90,000 requests for information per year. We can do humanitarian work and find missing persons. If somebody has an accident overseas or if they're in some kind of danger, then the system can be used to locate family members. We use our huge database to get in touch with family members who can buy a plane ticket for somebody who's stuck overseas. And, of course, we also deal with lost or stolen travel documents. We answer questions about Spanish citizens abroad who might be facing prison or legal problems, and we check their documentation, and in some cases we issue laissez-passer to a person to allow them to come back to Spain, or in some cases issue a warrant for their arrest if they're wanted by Spanish authorities. So this flowchart tells you what happens when a document is lost abroad. If a citizen has lost their travel documents or had them stolen, they can go to the Spanish consulate, and there's a 24-hour hotline. And the consulate can contact our center at any time and get an answer in just a matter of minutes and be able to issue a laissez-passer, an emergency passport, and solve the document problem quickly. So the citizen can either remain in the country where they are or they can come back to Spain if they need to. So these are the conclusions of my presentation. Just to emphasize that the single window is available 24 hours, and it doesn't require heavy human resources. There are about 5 shifts and not very many officials working in the center. And they need good equipment, computer, reliable email, and they need good training. The personnel have to have very good training. They have to be able to confirm identity, and they have to do it very quickly and solve all kinds of emergencies that arise. And it's not the same answer every time, obviously. So with that brief presentation, we will be showing you a short video which will give you an illustration of how it all works, all these technical innovations. Thank you very much.
Cuando quieras.
The Spanish National Police Force 24-Hour Center, an added extra to the national identity document for paperwork abroad. Marina, a Spanish woman who is resident in Buenos Aires, is making plans for her coming holidays. She wishes to spend a few days in Rome and needs to book her flights. Through her smartphone and her Spanish electronic national identity document, no-hassle, error-free confirmation of her personal data is promptly provided for her booking, thanks to NFC technology. She doesn't even touch the keyboard. What's more, she signs for the purchase of her ticket by way of proof that she is indeed the person who is making the purchase. For greater security, Marina goes to the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to enter her name into the Traveller's Register, including her personal data and the details of her trip, so she may be located in case of emergency. The process is protected by all the necessary confidentiality guarantees. At the airport, she again uses her electronic ID card, this time at the automatic security gate. In a matter of seconds, her identity is checked and she goes straight through to the boarding area. On arriving at her destination, Marina goes to the ABC, Automated Border Control Terminals, where she uses her Spanish electronic ID card as her travel document. She's then allowed to cross the border directly in compliance with local security. Next, at the hotel, she uses her electronic ID card to register. This is done automatically with an NFC app, which reads her personal details and feeds them into the hotel register. There is no need for her to get rid of her ID card at any point in this time-saving process. Leaving her luggage at the hotel, Marina decides to go sightseeing around this beautiful city. Unfortunately, while going through the streets packed with tourists and stopping to take photographs, she doesn't notice that her documentation falls out of her bag. On discovering her loss, Marina goes to the Spanish consulate in Rome, as without her documentation, she will be unable to travel back home. At the consulate, she'll be asked to make a statement of loss or theft of documents, where she must provide her details, along with a photograph and her signature. This application form will be sent telematically to the National Police Force 24-hour Centre. With this information, the 24-hour Centre consults the ID and passport database of the National Police Force to verify Marina's identity and nationality, and thereby allow the consulate to issue a safe conduct, enabling her to make her return journey. As this once-only safe conduct is temporary, Marina may not use it for any purpose other than identification when making her return journey. The 24-hour Centre is a communications hub to consular offices to send applications concerning the documentation of Spanish citizens abroad. Once the 24-hour Centre has checked the database, it provides in real time such information on the ID card and passport as is necessary to verify a person's identity, detect forged documents, and compare fingerprints. With a small investment, both financial and personal, it takes just a few minutes to produce information on the identity and nationality of Spanish citizens abroad lacking identity papers. Thanks to the integral service of the National Police Force 24-hour Centre, latest generation documents are available and at the service of all Spanish citizens. The Spanish National Police Force 24-hour Centre, an added extra to the national identity document for paperwork abroad.
Thank you, gentlemen. Shall we move on and ask questions at the end? So, our next speaker, Tom Kinnigan. Tom Kinnigan is the manager of international organizations and regulatory at IDEMIA. For more than 35 years, he has held various management positions in information communication technology, product development, and production of identity documents and related systems. He has been a leading individual in various large-scale projects on the implementation of e-passport schemes. Tom is the conveyor of ISO SC17 Working Group 3, which is the group that, in close cooperation with ICAO, is responsible for the development and maintenance of the specifications on travel documents, otherwise known as ICAO Document 9303 and ISO 7501. In this function, he is an active contributor to the work of ICAO's Technical Advisory Group, the New Technologies Work Group, and the Implementation and Capacity Building Work Group, as well as the ICAO PKD Board. He has been the lead editor of various technical papers, ICAO Document 9303, and its supplements. Tom is also the editor-in-chief of Keesing's Journal of Documents and Identity. Tom's presentation will focus on ICAO's Document 9303 composition. Please welcome Tom Kinnigan.
Thank you very much. If you have in-depth knowledge of Doc 9303, this is not for you. Don't start running. If you think you have in-depth knowledge on Doc 9303, but you assume that you might have missed some of the latest developments in that area, then this is for you. I want to walk you through the present version of Doc 9303 as it's published on the ICAO website, which is the 7th edition that is there since 2015. And this 7th edition consists of 12 parts. The first 3 parts providing you with common specifications that are valuable for all form factors of travel documents. The parts 4 up to 8 are physical specifications specific for the various form factors that we know in machine-readable travel documents. And the last 4 parts, 9 to 12, are describing the electronic part of the modern travel document. So let's have a look at these parts. Part 1 is the introductory part. It provides you with some general information on ICAO and Doc 9303. It provides you with all definitions, terms, and abbreviations that we use in Doc 9303, and it gives you a guidance on how to use the other parts. Which parts do you need for which kind of product or project? Part 2 provides you with specifications for the security of design, manufacture, and issuance. It gives you information on how to secure the issuance, how to secure production facilities, how to deal with newly issued MRTDs and lost and stolen MRTDs, as well as information on machine-assisted document security verification, physical security features that you could verify in an automated manner. Part 3 is also a general part. It provides you specifications that are valid for all types of travel documents, such as, for instance, country codes, such as, for instance, the OCRB font that is used in the machine-readable zone, the way we describe dates, the date formats, as well as transliterations that are used for transliteration from, for instance, Arabic script into the machine-readable zone. That does not support that, but there are rules for that, and there are tables in this part 3. Since 2018, April this year, a new part 3 is on the website of ICAO, which is an amended part, and it consists of amendments to the 2015 version. For instance, new 3-letter codes, like for the EU, the European Union, and other organizations. It has some editorial corrections, has some clarifications, and it has a broader description of the format of dates used in travel documents to meet the common practice that we see in the world. Part 4 is a specific part for passport books. It describes the construction and the dimensions of passport books and the general layout of the data page and the contents of that data page specifically for this form factor of travel documents. It also has been amended this year. It has some revision gone into the figures that are presented in this part to meet the new specifications for date formats, and we counter a practice that we have seen in some countries to add additional pages to passports when the book is full with stamps and visas. That is something that we don't want, so a specific statement is made here that after issuance no pages should be added to a machine-readable passport. You should go for a new booklet. Part 5, same for the TD1, the credit card size machine-readable official travel document, as we call it. Well, the same as in Part 4 for the booklet. It provides you with the dimensions of the card, provides you with the layout and the contents. And also here in Part 5 we have amendments specifically related to the figures that have a new date format in them. Part 6 describes the TD2 size, slightly larger than TD1 card form factor. Again, dimensions, layout and contents. Part 7 is on the visa stickers, machine-readable visa type A and the machine-readable visa type B. The various specifications for these visa are described in Part 7. Part 8 is a new part, and that was not there in 2015. In 2015 we already had a placeholder for guidance material on emergency travel documents, and now since April this year this new Part 8 has become a fact and is also published and provides you guidance material on the issuance of emergency travel documents. Now we come to the electronic part, Part 9, deployment of biometric information. It says something about the E in the eMRTD. It provides you with the famous chip inside symbol, the sizes and the way that you should reproduce that on your travel document. It says something on biometric identification, how ICAO came to the selection of certain biometrics that can be used in travel documents and how they are stored in the contactless chip in the travel document. Also, Part 9 is amended. Besides some corrections, we added a reference to an application profile in the ISO standard for contactless chip technology, specific application profile to find your way into that standard for those specs that are interesting for machine-readable travel documents. Specifically, it updated some references to new ISO standards, and it has a revised appendix to meet this new application profile for the contactless chip. Part 10 is on the logical data structure, the structure in which information shall be stored in the contactless chip in such a way that an inspection system will be able to find its way and retrieve the proper information from that chip, is described in this Part 10, which also is amended, and it has inclusion of the application profile that I mentioned before, and it also introduces the security object that is used in signing electronically the data on the passport chip. That certificate that enables you to verify this security object is now mandatory to be stored on the chip itself as well. So also that is new in comparison to the 2015 version. Part 11 provides you with the security protocols, the access protocols, the verification of authenticity and integrity protocols, as well as the copy protection of the electronic information. This Part 11 also is amended, and specifically an informative appendix has been added for a certain mapping, which is a part of the access control protocol, the PACE protocol. Part 12 is on the public key infrastructure, the infrastructure that you need to support to be able to distribute the necessary cryptographic material, the certificates, to be able to verify e-passports at the border. Speaking of borders, we have more than just this DOC 903, which forms the set of specifications for travel documents. In the TAG meeting in April this year, a whole number of technical reports have been endorsed, and these technical reports also have been published on the website and are expected to be endorsed at the Air Transport Committee in November this year, and then effectively become part of the standard. There's a technical report on visible digital seals, the use of 2D barcodes in non-chip documents. There's a technical report on logical data structure 2, the data structure that enables you to write information to the chip after issuance of the travel document. There's a portrait quality technical report that provides you a very decent and thorough specifications on how to get optimal quality in the portraits that you capture and use in the travel documents. We have 3 technical reports on testing, Part 3, Part 4, and Part 5. Part 3 is on the data structure testing, Part 4 is testing for inspection systems, and Part 5 is testing of security objects like certificates and CRLs. There is a guidance on migration of the country signing certificates from a situation where some countries have more than one CSCA and want to move to one CSCA. There's a new technical report on optical machine authentication, and there is some guidance on evidence of identity, as was described to you yesterday in this forum. Those are effectively, once endorsed, part of the specifications and should be incorporated later. Are there any people in the room that are responsible for border control or inspection of travel documents? There are people in the room that are. I wonder if you know that we also have some new specifications that are already pretty old. In 2011, we introduced LDS version 1.8, which is following the original LDS version 1.7. And in this 1.8 version, we have moved some information that you usually would find in a file that's called ef.com on a chip. And ef.com provides you with the table of contents of the chip and with some version information. However, this ef.com is not signed electronically, so you would not be able to verify if that has not been changed. It's more secure to electronically sign such information. So what you should do is you should not read this ef.com, but you should read the EFSOD, the security object, which is electronically signed, so you can verify that. Issuers are very eager to start issuing travel documents that comply to this LDS version 1.8, but they are insecure if your inspection systems are already ready to meet those requirements and to properly handle those passports. Another one is from 2014, maybe even more interesting. It's the Supplemental Access Control technical report that was introduced in 2014. That's already incorporated into Doc 9203 7th edition, and it provides a stronger new access control mechanism called Password Authenticated Connection Establishment, PACE. And when that was introduced, it was described as supplemental access control, where the old access control mechanism, basic access control, and the PACE protocol would be on the chip together. So if your system is not ready to handle the PACE protocol, it can still get access to the chip using basic access control. Since the 1st of January of this year, issuers are allowed under Doc 9203 to issue passports that do not support basic access control anymore, but support only the PACE protocol. That means if your inspection system is not ready for that protocol, then you will no longer have access to the chip which is equipped with only this PACE protocol. So it's worth checking your systems, I would say. It's also worth to stay updated. All this information can be found on the ICAO website. The URL is on this last slide. And with that, I would end this presentation on Doc 9203. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Mr. Rajesh Kumar is an active member of ISO SC17, Work Group 3, Task Force 5, representing Singapore. Rajesh Kumar is also the current editor of Document 9303, Part 12. Thankfully for me, he is also active participant in the ICBWG and the New Technologies Work Group. Mr. Rajesh Kumar's presentation will provide a practical experience on e-passport validation. Please pay attention.
Okay, good afternoon. The first time I started making these presentations on issues with e-passport validation was in 2012. And that time I used to talk about issues with document signers and CSCAs. And then in 2015, I started talking about issues with the SOD and encoding of the data on the chip that we were encountering in trying to validate the documents. Now, I do those presentations 5 times a year, right? And they're quite boring because I keep repeating the same stuff all the time. So I always try to start off with a joke or lighten up the proceedings by saying something funny. But in preparing for this presentation, I suddenly realized that I have used up all my jokes and I can't think of any new ones. So then I decided to take some inspiration from Simon yesterday and think of some life-changing moment that happened 4 months ago. Nada. I went back 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I couldn't find anything in the last 40 years that was life-changing for me. Right? Pretty depressing that I have a very monotonous and boring life. Right? Thanks, Simon. So, since I can't make the presentation interesting if I had the same one, so I had to take the final option that I had, was to change my presentation altogether. So usually I talk about defects that you see at the border and how to fix them. But this time my presentation is about what impact those defects have on your validation process and on fraud detection at your border, right? But where does all this information come from? It's because we've been trying to validate e-passports at the Singapore border since 2006, right? Currently, we are reading e-passports from 135 countries and 3 organizations. And over the years, we have found about 23 different defects from 55 countries. And these defects can lead to verification failure depending on the crypto toolkit that you are using. The good news is there are about 80 countries that are doing it right. But unfortunately, we have also seen that countries that are doing it right end up introducing defects when they change their system or upgrade their security features or something. So this is going to be a constant issue that we are going to face. And when I talk about these defects, decision makers always ask me, what is a defect in an e-passport chip, right? Is it the chip that is defective? The answer is no. Chip hardware is very stable. Usually a chip has an operating system which is also very standard. Some of them have some weird behavior, especially we found one passport where we were trying to do active authentication, and it had a very specific way that we had to fire the command to be able to succeed in that one. But we also realized that it is allowed under 7816-4, and readers seem to be able to handle it, so that's not a problem at borders. The application itself, no issues till now. Then you have data elements, elementary files. Tom was talking about ef.com, ef.sod. The ef stands for elementary file, right? And those are also quite good. But what these elementary files have is a structure and a value that is defined in Doc 9303. And when I talk about a defect, it's either the structure has a problem or the value has an issue, right? When we started doing this in 2012, when we started analyzing all the defects at the border in Singapore, we found that 34% of documents that were presented at our border had defects, which would prevent them from being validated. The good news is the states have started correcting. The last number that we saw at our border was 16% of documents, but that depends on your passenger profile as well, right? Recently, I talked to 2 different agencies in another country, and they are seeing numbers about 40% failures of e-passport validation at the border. There are also possible that some of these problems may manifest in the future. For example, the defect in the encoding of signature value, which I will explain later in my presentation. So in the implementation and capacity building working group, we decided that there was already a non-compliance subgroup that talked about non-compliance with respect to physical security features or the visual inspection zone. So for example, people who put 2D barcodes on their optical in the visual inspection zone or did not properly align those fields, they have been doing that work since 2009. In 2016, that group was expanded to include chip encoding defects, and there were 2 new members who were added to that subgroup, Tom Kinneging and myself. And we identified 6 defects that we want to focus on of the 23 that we have identified. And we decided that ICBWG, through ICAO, will send out a state letter to countries to fix those issues. One of the concerns we had when we were thinking of sending out those letters is that countries might get offended and react badly, right? So we sent out a very small batch of 9 letters first. The good news is the reaction has been very positive. 7 of them came back and said, we'll fix it, or we have already fixed it. And now we are in the process of sending additional letters. We'll have to send out about 55 letters before we get through that current batch of problems we have, but we're doing it in stages. But the issue is that even if a country corrects the defect, the currently defective documents are still in circulation, and they are going to turn up at your border. They're not going to withdraw those documents, right? So these documents have to be handled at your border in some shape or form. So currently there are 3 known implementations for handling defects, 3 known ways about how people are trying to handle defects at the border. The very first one is do nothing. It's the easiest thing to do, right? So in case of defect, what happens is the verification fails. And what applications do is throw this error to the officer and let them decide. And what we have noticed is that this happens to be the most common mechanism in ABCs. So typically what you have is a bank of ABCs, and then one officer sitting behind a glass panel with 6 monitors out there, and every time something goes wrong at one of the ABC, he gets a message there, which looks like those crosses and ticks that I showed you there, shown on the screen. And he has to make a decision whether to let this passenger go through or not. So he has a button on his desk which he can press to open the door, the gate, in case there is a failure. Now that means that that person has to make a decision in about 2 seconds whether to let this person go through or refer him to secondary, right? With just what he sees on the screen. So he's got a data point in time. I'm aware of 3 trials. I'm pretty sure there are more trials that have been done. In one case, a country created 10 fraudulent documents. 5 of them were their national documents, and 5 of them were foreign documents. And they sent passengers with these documents through their own ABCs. All 10 of them managed to get through. In a second trial, there were 3 documents that were created by another country. They did the same test, but these were just national documents, and they got through. The last one I heard was about 5 months ago. It was only a single document that they tried against a national document, which was a fraudulent document, and it managed to get through the ABC. In all 3 cases, the officer was asked why they allowed the document to go through, and their response was, "We see that problem all the time." They were not able to differentiate between a fraud and a defect. Now in case 2 and case 3, I can understand because their national documents do have a defect. But in the first case that I talked about, the 5 national documents, that document is perfect. There is nothing wrong with that document. But the officer still thought that he sees that defect all the time, right? So they get desensitized to this possibility. And if you're going to have this failure 40% of the time, you can't send 40% of your travelers to secondary. You will have a bigger secondary than you have primary, right? So it's a decision at a point of time, right? And so this opens up a vulnerability. If you're just going to display it to the officer and expect him to take a decision on that. The second mechanism that we have seen, and let me say this, we've been trying to do this in Singapore since 2006, and our 2006 and 2009 implementation was exactly throw things to the officer and let him decide. That's where we also started from. Now the other mechanism that we have seen is something that I call defect profiling. Some people call it defect list management or something. We tried this in 2012. And the idea is simple, that we know that the verification fails for certain documents, and we would have analyzed that that document has some error. For example, if you are not able to verify because the country code is in lowercase and the document is from a certain country, so you maintain a list that says this country verification will fail because the country code is in lowercase. So you have a list at the border. It's a machine-based list. So when a passport from that country fails verification, you check whether that country is on the list, then you check whether that error that you are seeing in the structure is the error that you already know, and then you also look for some other mechanisms to authenticate the document. For example, active authentication worked, all the hashes match. So in spite of the fact that you have not been able to do a verification, you consider it a valid document and let that person go through. The issue here is fraudsters who understand your defect profiling only need to create a defective document to evade detection, not a good document. There was a case recently, and this information came to me secondhand because the person was involved in analysis, asked my opinion in terms of what could have gone wrong. So at this particular border, a passenger turns up and he is entitled to use the ABCs to enter that country. It was just a coincidence that on that day the ABCs were not functioning, so he had to go to manual inspection. The officer at manual inspection felt there was something wrong with this person and sent him to secondary. They looked at the document with a magnifying glass and they found that it is definitely a fraudulent document, but they put that same document on their ABCs and the ABC said it is a good document. Why? This country whose document had been created, the fraudulent document had been created, is a country that has a defect, and the defect is that the country code is in lowercase. What the fraudsters had done is they had created an e-passport with a proper chip, with a proper DG1, a proper DG2. They have created their own active authentication private public key pair and put the public key in the right data group. And then they took a SOD from a valid passport, simply replaced the hashes into that, and wrote that SOD back into the chip. So the ABC software that was doing profiling found that it could not verify that e-passport, found that it is the right defect in the SOD that it's not able to verify it, but all the data group hashes matched and the active authentication matched, so it called it a good document. What is surprising for me is the sophistication of that fraud, right? Which means that there are people on the other side who know as much about these documents as we do. But that's not surprising, because I have always said that the difference between a good guy and a bad guy is simply motivation and intent. It is not the skills, right? You have to remember that. I also went for a presentation somewhere, I won't mention where I was told that the price of a good fraudulent document these days is about 70,000 euros. And I'm thinking, I could be interested. Yeah, it's absolutely. It's a life-changing moment, yeah? All right? So when it is that kind of money on the table, I'm pretty sure there are very clever people who are trying to bypass that system. And by doing this defect profiling, you are opening up a vulnerability to be exploited. I have also seen cases where people take this profiling to the extreme. 2 years ago, I met somebody who said that for every country and every passport that they knew of, they had 650 profile checks that they had come up with. 650. So I asked him, so how long does it take? He said it took 2.5 minutes. Right? Imagine a guy has to stand at the ABC for 2.5 minutes to go through. There's no point in having an ABC anymore, right? Plus, you still have this vulnerability that remains. So what's the third way of handling something like this? This is what we call defect handling. And I have to confess, we went through all of these phases and we realized the issue at each point of time and changed it. So it was in 2012 that I realized that people could attack my system because I was doing defect profiling. And it's in 2012 that we switched to start working on defect handling, right? And defect handling says that in spite of the defect, I try to verify the document, right? I don't stop just because the verification failed. I actually try to do a proper verification in spite of the defect. What that requires is that every detected defect is analyzed, and you have to find a workaround to be able to validate it in spite of the defect. The defect profiling was by country, but defect handling becomes by defect, because typically these defects are introduced based on the system that has been purchased by that country. And if the same vendor has supplied that same system to 6 countries, you could pretty much be confident that all 6 countries will have that defect. So if you see a defect one time and you figure out how to handle it, you handle any future defects that could happen at the border. So a question comes, what does defect handling actually mean? So I have got 2 examples here, right? And if you don't understand these examples, it's perfectly all right. The first one is a problem that we saw with one country where in the SOD there is something called a hashing algorithm, a digest algorithm identifier, and a signature algorithm identifier. That structure is defined by an RFC called RFC 3852. And RFC 3852 assumes that the digest algorithm identifier that is used for hashing the encapsulated content and the algorithm identifier that is used to hash the signed attributes is the same, but it does not explicitly tell you that it has to be the same. It's implicit in it. If you have read that document 10 times, you will realize that it implicitly assumes that both the hashing algorithms have to be the same, right? But one country has used SHA-512 to hash the encapsulated content info, and then uses SHA-256 to do the digital signature. The problem is all the crypto toolkits out there in the market, go and look at the signature algorithm identifier, find a hashing algorithm which is SHA-256, try to use that to hash the encapsulated content info and verify, and it fails. So what we had to do is that we had to create a crypto toolkit, and in that we wrote a low-level function where we do verification as a 2-step. So we look to see if there is a digest algorithm identifier present. If it is, irrespective of what else is there in the signature algorithm identifier, we use that to hash the encapsulated content info and then do the comparison. Then we go and read the signature algorithm identifier. If it has a hashing algorithm also defined, we use that to hash the signed attributes. But if it doesn't have a hashing algorithm, we reuse the hashing algorithm that we saw first to do the hashing before the signature. Right? So in a way, we have handled both for people who do it correctly and people who do it wrongly. But that is what we call defect handling. Second example, this is something to do with the wrong encoding of signature value, RSA, I mentioned earlier on. This is something that took us a long time to figure out what was going wrong here, right? And the very first time we figured this out, I took it to ISO for a discussion when we had the meeting in Paris. And I had 5 or 6 slides explaining this problem. I did that presentation. There was a stunned silence in the room, and a hand went up and said, "Can you please repeat that whole thing again?" Right? And these are ISO guys, okay? These are technical experts. And then when I did the second time, somebody else raised their hand and said, "You know what? This could also happen with ECDSA because we had that issue in our own quality control, in our own production environment." And we went back and checked, and it is true. So what happens is that if you look at signature values, it is something called a modular operation. And it sounds very complicated, but it's very simple. You know a clock, right? You know a watch, a clock. A clock is what we call a modulo 12 operation. So when the clock goes beyond 12 and goes to 15, it is 3 o'clock, right? So it's a divide and remainder. That's what a modulo is. And so a signature is also a modulo operation. That means it's divided by a value, and what you have is a remainder, which means the remainder has to be smaller than your divisor, right? If you're dividing by 12, the remainder has to be smaller than 12, right? It's a very simple logic. And that's one of the first checks that you do when you're trying to validate a signature, is whether the value of your signature is smaller than the value of your modulus. But unfortunately, the standard says you look at the length to find out whether the value is smaller than the value of your modulus. And there are 2 countries, what they have done is after calculating the remainder, they have put an extra 00 in front, because of which the length becomes longer than the value of the modulus. So it's like saying that if I had a value of, say, 10, I was doing modulo 12. So 10 is smaller than 12. But 010 is longer than just 12. So the software thinks it's the value is higher, and it rejects the signature. It fails verification. So what we did in the toolkit is that we take a signature value and we look at whether it has any zeros in front, whether or not there is a defect in encoding. We look at all the zeros in front and we remove all those zeros, because a 001 is the same as a 1. It doesn't make a difference, right, in your mathematical calculation. And then we compare with the modulus after removing the leading zeros. There were 2 countries that had this problem. In the case of one country, 69% of all the, 69% of all the documents had this problem. In the case of the other country, 0.79% of the documents had the problem. But that is just a statistical probability based on what is the value of the RSA key pair that you had generated. If there are other implementations with this problem, they are not manifested yet because of the value of the key pair that was generated. But at some point of time in the future, we expect to see it from other countries as well, because there seems to be quite a big misunderstanding on how to encode the signature value. But now, having done this, even if someone else makes that mistake in the future, we already handle it, right? And so we are able to verify that document in spite of it having a defect, and we don't have to depend on a defect list or a defect profiling. Now, this we have done for all the 23 defects that we have detected till now. Plus, we have also anticipated defects, and we have built that into what we are doing in Singapore. So the current status that we have in Singapore, in 2012, we could not verify 1 in 3 e-passports. Now, after this exercise, that number is down to 1 in 5,000. That means for every 5,000 e-passports that are presented, we are able to verify 4,999. And one of those passports may be sent to secondary because we can't differentiate between a defect or a fraud. Right? Now, why this 1 in 5,000? Because there is this one problem that we have with passport. Venezuela and a couple of other countries have made this mistake. We know how to handle it, but the way we handle it increases our processing time. Okay, and in Singapore, we have a very strict metric that we need to do the entire verification in under 11 seconds. So we are trying to figure out a way of being able to handle it and bring it down below 11 seconds. And once we do that, this number should become even better, 1 in 15,000 or 1 in 20,000. But in doing this defect handling, we had a additional bonus that we managed to bring down the verification time to under 200 milliseconds. And if any of you understands signature validation, you will know that an ECDSA signature validation can take up to 700 milliseconds. But every few seconds that you can shave off that process is an advantage. So reading takes between 4 to 7.5 seconds, and our entire process of validating the document takes less than 8 seconds at the max. That means we do it only at primary, we don't do it in ABCs. So the officer would have put that document into the reader and ask you the purpose of your visit and how many days you are going to be here, and in that time, he gets back a result saying whether this is a good document or a fraudulent document, right? And this is my last slide, right? What is the impact of how you handle defects? And this is practical. I talk to people in border control. Border control officers are losing faith in the value of the chip because they are seeing so many error rates. They are beginning to think that the optical features are good enough. They're beginning to lose faith in the chip. I actually had a discussion with somebody from Frontex when I met him in Brasilia, and he told me PKI is broken and chip data can be falsified. Unfortunately, that opinion comes because of the system he has seen, the way it handles defects, right? PKI is secure. You cannot have false acceptance. You can have false rejection. That is the whole promise of PKI. But it's because we are not handling the defects properly that border control officers are coming to that opinion that the chip is broken and PKI is broken. And also, how you handle your defects could actually open up a vulnerability at a border, right? So, thank you for your attention.
Do we have time?
We have about 5 minutes left. The presentation went a bit long.
Okay, no problem. Ladies and gentlemen, would anybody have any questions for this group? Come on, don't be shy. There's got to be a question out there that you would like to hear an answer to. All right, well, I'll start hitting questions then. All right, Tom, do you expect more amendments in the near future?
Yes, we already have quite a list of things that we plan to do, that we plan to start very shortly after this conference to work on, which would affect, I think, about 9 parts of the 12. You also have seen this list of substantial technical reports that need to be incorporated into Doc 903, and that information is so substantial that we might consider not to create a new set of amendments, but to go for the creation of the 8th edition of Doc 903 instead. That would also, I think, time-wise, meet the practice from the past that every 5 years a new edition of Doc 903 had been issued. If we start working on it now, and we would be able to get that work done by 2020, when the next technical advisory group meets, and then we would also meet this 5 years time period to come with a new edition. So I expect that edition 8 might be published in 2020.
All right, thank you, Tom. Enrique, perhaps this wasn't specifically pointing to your presentation, but your presentation brought a question to my mind. The Spanish National Police act as the National Central Bureau for Interpol, is that correct? Okay.
Correcto, sí.
Yes.
About how many lost or stolen passports are reported on an annual basis for you?
Fueron los que pasaron.
Well, abroad in 2017, I can't give you the exact figure. I have a figure 12,280, and that is according to our database for the 24-hour center. So it includes passports that were lost or stolen and passports that were declared lost but then found again. So altogether, they amount to about 2,280 last year. And this year, the figure is pretty much the same. And that's for documents going missing abroad.
Rajesh, I have perhaps a question or a comment. Actually, it'll start off as a comment, but I'll ask you to respond to it. Your presentation, I always enjoy your presentations, but to boil it down, the risk at the border points, the entry points, results from the inability of the traveler identity to be properly assessed. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the thing is that we depend on the contents of the chip and validating that to ascertain the identity of the traveler. It's almost like an offline token. If this is combined with other mechanisms for doing that risk assurance, yes, you can handle these issues. But a lot of ABCs depend on the offline token, the e-passport chip, to be the token against which all of this identity establishment is done. But I agree with you, yes, it's a question of not being able to ascertain the identity of the traveler.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. I broke the ice. Anybody have a question? I almost saw a hand go up. Almost. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to please leave this session knowing that we want to work with border authorities. We want to make their mission successful. And please remember, the number of travelers are ever increasing. The tools that have been and will be developed will help you. But we, ICAO TAG, the New Technology Work Group, the ICBWG, need to know the tools are right for you. We will work hard to assist you in all governments in protecting their nations, but in order to do so, we need your participation. We need more participation of the border authorities, the issuing authorities. We want to be able to provide you with the tools to do your job and to do your job well. But in order to do that, we need to know what you, the customer, wants. So, I thank you, and if I could ask you to give the session a hand.
Thank you very much, Mike. Super. Thank you so much. We're back on time. We're keeping on time, actually. Before coffee break, I'd just like to announce that the new Trip magazine is available. Hot off the press. There's some copies at the back of the room. We're always looking for suggestions, contributions, and we'd like to introduce to you today Anthony Frederick, the coordinator of the magazine. I'd like Anthony to stand up, please, and be recognized. His coordinates are in the magazine, so if you're writing to him, and we hope you will, he's the guy. Second, the English version of the revised Doc 9303 has been posted to the TRIP website. Third housekeeping item, we're conducting at the moment a survey on the interpretation services at ICAO, and the survey itself is available on the TRIP app on your mobile vehicle, phone or whatever, iPad. We'd like we'd be appreciative if you could fill out the survey during the coffee break maybe, or after the coffee break, and let us know how well we're doing. So the coffee break right now is sponsored by Imprimerie Nationale. So again, have a good coffee break, networking, visit the booths, and we'll see you back here at 3 o'clock. Thank you.